perfect wedding day was set, but when the bride walked down the aisle, something unexpected happened. No one could have predicted that it would be the loyal dog who would stop the whole ceremony. What's going on? This story will keep you on the edge of your seat. Before continuing the story, tell me which city you're watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. No more waiting. The story begins right now. On the day of her wedding, Emily's faithful German shepherd, Max, stood in her way as she tried to walk down the aisle. The guests immediately fell into silence. For more than 10 years, Max had been her constant companion. At first, she assumed he was simply anxious, but what she soon uncovered would change her understanding of love forever. Emily stopped in her tracks, her dress flowing around her as Max leaned against her legs. He didn't bark or growl. He just stared at her with such intensity that it sent a shiver down her spine. "Max, come on, buddy," she whispered, trying to move him. He wouldn't budge. The murmurs grew. Her father reached for the leash. "Emily, we need to get moving," he urged. Max let out a low growl, making even her father hesitate. Emily's heart sank. Max never growled. She knelt, her dress pooling around her, and cupped his face. "What's wrong, boy?" she murmured, stroking his graying muzzle. Then she saw it, the labored breathing, trembling legs. Her breath hitched. Something was terribly wrong. "Emily," her mother called out, her voice edged with impatience. "We're running out of time. What's going on?" But Emily paid no attention to anything except Max, the one who had been by her side through every sorrow and victory. She leaned in, pressing her forehead gently against his. "I'm here, Max," she whispered. "I'm not leaving you." As she helped him sit, his body leaned heavily against her. The guests whispered in confusion, but Emily heard none of it. Max's amber eyes pleaded with her, as if trying to say something words couldn't express. "Max," she whispered again, voice breaking. Her fiancé, James Bennett, stepped forward, concern on his face. "Emily, is everything okay?" he called softly. She looked up at him, then back at Max, the knot of unease tightening in her chest. Emily's father crouched beside her. "Emily, we can't wait much longer. The ceremony needs to begin." She barely registered the words, her mind drifting into memories. Max is a scruffy puppy, trembling during a thunderstorm. Max standing watch during her worst heartbreaks. Max sprinting through the park the day she met James. He had always been her anchor, and now something was terribly wrong. Without hesitation, she decided. "We're going to the vet," she said firmly. Her mother gasped. "The wedding can wait," she added, standing and gathering her skirts. She turned to James, her voice soft. "I'm sorry, but I can't leave him like this." James didn't hesitate. "You don't need to apologize, Max comes first." Stunned guests watched as Emily, still in her wedding dress, led Max to her car. James followed, calling the emergency vet, while her father explained to the minister. As they separated, Emily's attention remained solely on the dog who had devoted 13 years to loving her. Max pressed against her, his breath shallow but steady, placing his full trust in her. The car sped toward the vet. In the back seat, Emily cradled Max's head in her lap, her wedding dress pooling around them, lace wrinkled and smudged. Max's breathing was labored, each shallow rise and fall of his chest like a countdown. James kept glancing in the rearview mirror, jaw tight. "We're almost there," he reassured her, though his grip on the wheel said otherwise. Emily brushed away a tear, stroking Max's graying muzzle. "I should have realized," she murmured. "He's been acting differently all week. I thought it was just the wedding chaos. But..." James's voice was steady, yet gentle. "You couldn't have known. What matters is that you're here now." The clinic came into view, its lot glowing under warm lights. Dr. Adams, Max's longtime vet, was already waiting. As they pulled up, he stepped forward, helping them inside. Emily carried Max, her wedding dress trailing behind her, forgotten. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and pine, a strangely comforting mix. Dr. Adams guided Max onto the exam table, working with quiet concentration as Emily kept a hand on her dog. James wrapped an arm around her. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the vet looked up, his expression full of sympathy. Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. Max is in advanced heart failure, doctor, Adam said softly, his voice carrying the weight of the news. The stress of the day has worsened his symptoms. Medication can help keep him comfortable, but we're looking at months, not years. The room seemed to spin around her, the walls closing in as the reality of his words settled in. Emily gripped James's hand tightly, her knuckles turning white. Is he in pain? She whispered, barely able to find her voice. Dr. Adams shook his head gently. No, he assured her with quiet certainty. But stopping you from walking down the aisle, that was his way of asking for help. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, spilling down her cheeks as she leaned forward, pressing her forehead to Max's. His fur was warm beneath her touch, his breathing steady but weak. I'm so sorry, buddy, she murmured, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. James cleared his throat, steady as always, his presence grounding her. What's the next step, Doc? He asked, his voice firm but calm. How do we make sure he stays as comfortable as possible? Dr. Adams began outlining a treatment plan, speaking in careful, measured tones, but Emily barely heard him. Her mind swirled in a fog of emotions. The wedding, the guests, her parents. It all felt so distant, like something happening to someone else. She turned to James, her voice surprisingly steady despite the storm inside her. I need to stay with him, she said firmly, her decision made in an instant. James didn't hesitate, not for a second. He simply nodded. Then we stay, he said, his hand tightening around hers in silent support. Before she could say another word, the clinic door swung open with a quiet creak. Emily, her father's voice filled the small space as he stepped inside, followed closely by her mother, the minister, and Rachel, her maid of honor. We thought you might need some support, her father said, his usual strong demeanor softening as his gaze fell on Max. Her mother, always composed, was already dabbing at her eyes with the tissue, unable to hold back her emotions. Rachel lifted her phone, her expression determined yet gentle. The guests understand, she said, but maybe we don't have to cancel the wedding. Emily blinked, her breath catching. What do you mean? She asked hesitantly. The minister offered a kind smile. If you're willing, he said, we can hold the ceremony here with Max by your side. Emily's heart tightened, emotion rising in her throat. She turned to James, searching his face for any hesitation, any doubt. It's not the wedding we planned, he said softly, his eyes full of understanding. But it feels right. Emily let out a tearful laugh, the weight of the moment pressing into her chest. She nodded, gripping his hand even tighter. Let's do it. In an hour, the clinic became an impromptu wedding venue, filled with love and warmth. Rachel adjusted Emily's dress and veil, while James straightened his rumpled tuxedo. Emily found him perfect. The minister took his place with Max lying at their feet, wagging his tail as if he understood. As Emily and James exchanged vows, their hands tightly clasped, Emily felt an unshakable certainty. It wasn't the wedding they planned, but surrounded by those who mattered, it felt even more right. When the minister finally pronounced them husband and wife, Max let out a quiet, approving woof. The sound was soft but full of meaning, drawing both laughter and tears from everyone in the room. That night, instead of a grand reception with twinkling lights and a packed dance floor, Emily and James found themselves sitting on their apartment floor, still in their wedding clothes, their fingers laced together in the dim glow of their living room. Between them, Max lay comfortably, his head resting in Emily's lap, his warm presence filling the space with a quiet peace. The three of them shared takeout Chinese food, the scent of soy sauce and warm noodles wrapping around them like a familiar embrace. Each bite felt like a celebration, not of the chaos that had upended their day, but of the clarity it had brought. James turned to Emily, his gaze filled with admiration, love etched into every line of his face. This wasn't the perfect wedding, he said softly, his voice carrying both amusement and deep emotion, but it was perfect for us. Emily smiled, running her fingers gently through Max's fur, her heart full. "Because of him," she whispered, "he reminded us what love really means." The months after their unconventional wedding were a bittersweet blend of joy and heartache, a mix of gratitude and the quiet ache of what was to come. Max's treatment gave them precious time. On good days, he was his old self, trotting behind Emily, wagging his tail for James, and enjoying walks in the park where their story began. But the tough days arrived too. Some mornings he struggled to rise. On those days, Emily and James adapted, staying close and cherishing every moment. One winter night, Emily sat with Max's head in her lap, his warmth comforting. In the kitchen, James prepared something warm. Emily whispered, "You've been the best boy, Max. The very best." A moment later, James stepped into the room, carrying 2 steaming mugs. He took in the scene, his expression softening as he settled beside her. "How's he doing?" he asked, his voice low, careful. Emily exhaled, offering a faint smile. "He's tired," she admitted, stroking Max's ears. "But he's here, and that's what matters." James wrapped an arm around her, pressing a kiss to the side of her head. "He's a fighter," he murmured, "just like you." The words settled in her chest, bittersweet and true. As the weeks passed, the good days became fewer, their weight heavier against the growing number of difficult ones. And then, on a soft spring morning, Max let them know it was time. The sky was clear, the air warm, as if nature itself had granted them a perfect farewell. They spent the day in the backyard under blooming trees, giving Max all the love he had given them. They fed him his favorite treats, whispered endless thank yous and I love yous, and held him close, their hands on his fur, their voices the last thing he heard as he peacefully drifted into his final sleep. That evening, the house felt unbearably quiet. Emily sat at the kitchen table, staring at his empty bed, the absence of him a hollow ache in her chest. James, steady as ever, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You gave him a life full of love, Emily," he said softly. "He always knew how much he meant to you." She nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. "He taught me so much," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "about loyalty, about love. I miss him so much." James squeezed her hand, offering quiet understanding, no empty reassurances. In the weeks that followed, they honored Max's memory, not just in words, but in the way they carried his love forward. They reminisced, laughed at his antics, kept his collar on the shelf by the door. His presence lingered in the spaces he had filled, in the habits they had formed around him, in the quiet love he had left behind. One afternoon, as Emily sorted through old photos, she paused at one from their wedding at the clinic. It captured a moment that now felt even more profound. She and James exchanging vows, not looking at each other but at Max, who lay at their feet, watching them with quiet devotion. "Do you think he knew?" she asked softly, running her fingers over the image. James looked at the picture, then at her and nodded. "He knew exactly what he was doing," he said. "He reminded us what mattered most." Months later, on a quiet, rainy afternoon, Emily and James found themselves walking through the familiar halls of the shelter, the very place where Emily had once found Max. The scent of clean straw and gentle rain mixed in the air, and the soft sounds of dogs stirring in their kennels echoed around them. Emily's heart ached with a longing she couldn't quite put into words. She wasn't looking to replace Max. No dog could ever take his place, but the absence of his presence left a space in her heart that felt ready to be filled with love again. As they passed kennel after kennel, the hopeful eyes of countless dogs met theirs, each one searching for a home, a family, a second chance. And then, at the very end of the row, she saw him. A senior golden retriever lay curled on a well-worn blanket, his golden fur peppered with silver around his muzzle, his deep brown eyes calm and knowing. He lifted his head slightly, resting his paws gently on the floor as if waiting, as if he had always known this moment would come. Their eyes met, and in that instant Emily felt it, that same indescribable connection she had once felt all those years ago with Max. A silent understanding, a quiet recognition that went beyond words. "This is him," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion, her eyes welling with tears. He's the one. James knelt beside her, reaching out carefully. The dog, his name was Lucky, according to the tag on his kennel, let out a slow, contented sigh as James scratched gently behind his ears. His tail gave a small, lazy wag, and in that moment, there was no doubt. James smiled, nodding. "Welcome to the family, buddy." That night, as rain softly tapped against the window, Lucky curled up in Max's old bed, sighing as if settling into something familiar, safe. It was as though he understood the significance of the space he now occupied. Emily sat beside him, stroking his fur, her heart expanding in a way she hadn't thought possible. "We're going to give you the best life, Lucky," she promised, her voice full of quiet conviction. Because love like Max's wasn't meant to be kept, it was meant to be shared. Through Lucky, they found healing, laughter, purpose, in the simple joy of coming home to a wagging tail and unconditional love. Every year on their anniversary, Emily and James returned to the shelter, not just to remember, but to give back. They brought donations, spent time with the older dogs, often overlooked, and reminded themselves of the love that had changed their lives. It was their way of honoring Max's legacy. Max had taught them something invaluable. Love isn't measured by time, but by how deeply you live it. And as Lucky slept peacefully beside them, breathing steady and warm, they knew. Max's greatest gift had been this, teaching them that the heart always has room to love again. This story isn't just about a wedding, but a deeply emotional journey about love, loyalty, and the poignant decisions made during the most critical moments of life. It reminds us that love doesn't always go according to plan, and sometimes it's the unexpected moments that make us realize the true value of the relationships we've built. Those moments, though heartbreaking, were strangely beautiful. We learn that love isn't always perfect, but when it comes at the right time and with the right person, it brings real peace and happiness. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to click the subscribe button so you won't miss out on other inspiring and meaningful stories. Thank you for taking the time to watch. Stay with us as we continue to explore beautiful and emotional moments in life. Have a wonderful day.